Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 53 of College Football Throwdown. I am your host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hey there, Husker fans and college football fans.
Hey, all right. We are back. We're here to discuss the Nebraska Penn State game, as well as the results from the Week 12 of college football, and preview this upcoming finale to the season, all the big rivalry games, talk about the new playoff rankings, all sorts of stuff like that. And to start things off, we're going to dive into that Nebraska-Penn State game, which neither of us, you or I, got to watch live, as I was at a convention and just kind of checking the score sporadically on my phone, whereas you were working that day.
That's right. Thank God.
Yeah, and I think neither of us made the big effort because we assumed it was going to be a beatdown. As you can see, I'll get into our predictions here in a bit. But I've seen clips of the game now and kind of looked at the scores and what happened and the stats and all that stuff. And it is interesting that, I mean, early on in the game we were winning. Actually, it was 10-3 at one point because I think we got like an interception or something, or it wasn't an interception, but there was something good that went our way, and we got a quick score.
And it looked, right. And well, but that is important in that it shows that we have some talent on our team, and early in some games we've sometimes shown flashes like that, but the fact that we haven't been able to actually ever do anything with it really drives me crazy.
Right. Well, that's what I keep thinking about. Wisconsin's getting all this talk, now that they're on the cusp of possibly being in the playoff and the top four and all that. But in our game, in that first half, I mean, we were the better team in that half and would have been up by more points if we weren't shooting ourselves in the foot with those stupid mistakes. We were finding some good success against their defense offensively, and I think we had a really bad pick right at the start of the game that gave them like 7 easily. But until they kind of discovered how potent their running game would be and just started jamming it down our throats, we were actually doing better than them.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. That's what shows me that a properly coached and mentally tough football team with the talent level that Nebraska currently has on its roster would have been a competitive football team this year. So,
right. Well, and speaking of that, I was listening to that Tommy Frazier podcast that I've talked about a couple times on this show, where he was talking about the Penn State game, and they brought up an interesting thought of what if we still had Tommy Armstrong as our quarterback. Would that have prevented some of these losses that we've had just by his ability to scramble out of the pocket and get first downs when things break down, considering that our offensive line has been so bad?
Well, that's selective memory. I mean, Tommy was also notoriously bad at throwing interceptions to the other team and making horrible decisions, which would have also played into those scores too. And no, I honestly think that our record and the nature of the games might have been different, but our record would be pretty similar. To be frank, because at the end of the day, again, my big hang-ups is I really believe that the team has got some talent or had talent, but that we were a team that underperformed because I don't think our coaches put our players in their best position to win. And I mean that when I'm referencing play calling, I'm referencing defensive scheme and choices made about pressure and not pressuring and things of that nature at very critical points in games throughout the season. I mean, so many decisions were made this year that just look to be concessions rather than to try to play to win. And that's the part that just drove me crazy.
Yeah.
So.
No, you're right. And the play bad play calling would still be the Achilles heel of the team. Personally, I think, because you'll recall that I think Tanner Lee in those first 3 or 4 games, he threw as many or more interceptions than Tommy did all last season, just in that succession. So I think, actually, if you look at the stats, Tanner's worse than Lee or than Armstrong in terms of the interceptions. However, yeah, you would have to take into account like some of those drives we've had where Lee's arm, was what got us to do that. We wouldn't get those with Armstrong, but I think he had a more solid leadership on the team. That kind of don't give up attitude that he had.
Right.
I think would have helped us out in some situations, like against Northern Illinois.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
I think we'd be a little better off if we still had Tommy, but not that much. Maybe a game or two.
Not that much. Right. Exactly. I mean, maybe we don't beat Purdue, but instead we beat Northern Illinois. And so your record ends up being about the same, but you don't have that Northern Illinois loss that's so embarrassing,
right?
On your resume. But anyway, bottom line is that it's a team that I think collectively has some talent, but that talent doesn't even know how good it is. Even our own players don't understand how good they could be if they actually they think they're giving great effort. I guarantee if you walked up and asked them, they wouldn't say, "Oh yeah, we're sloughing it. We're not trying very hard." They would all tell you they're trying as hard as they can. But anybody who watches the game knows that there's an effort being exerted by the opposing team that's far greater than that being exerted by our team. And that's because they've not practiced and prepared and been trained to play at that level of intensity. That intensity just does not exist in the preparation that our team has prior to games. And it's going to, I think, speaking of that game, we can talk a little bit about the Penn State game. I think that played out in this past week again, where basically you saw a team that was playing. Not only does Penn State have better players than us, but they played with a far greater intensity than we did. And only after their intensity was diminished, because they had basically secured the victory, did we begin to be able to move the football and score some points.
Right. Well, yeah, and it is worth noting, I would say, because it's interesting to look at how the points progressed over the course of the game.
Right.
Because now I just lost it there. Go back. It was 10-42 at halftime, so up 32 points. Yeah, that's a pretty solid lead. But then in the third quarter, and I think they still had their first teamers in a good bit of the third quarter. They didn't score any touchdowns, and we scored 14 on them. So we went up to 24-42, so closing the gap a little bit. Then in the fourth quarter, they scored 2 touchdowns, went back up to 32, and it was 56-24. So it was back to being kind of out of reach. And then near the end of the game, we scored 3 touchdowns in quick succession, got one off of an onside kick at a point in the game where it didn't matter. Right,
where it was garbage time.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I would argue that coming out of halftime, when you're ahead 42-10, you've got this game won, and so it's a natural. It's kind of a natural tendency of human nature, especially young people, to back off a little bit, which they did, obviously, in that second half. But the point is that when the game was really in doubt, we weren't able to match their intensity at all.
True. Yep. And I will say, it is garbage time, as you say, but to the credit of our players, at least this time we were still putting up something of a fight and getting touchdowns and making some plays on offense. There in the second half, whereas in the Minnesota game, that was the game where I saw like zero effort at any point, even when it was decided and they might have been playing some of their lesser talent or whatever. We were still not able to get anything done. So I prefer this kind of bad to that kind of bad. That's one way to put it.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that. I mean, the Minnesota game was even worse because in that case we weren't outmatched talent-wise. In fact, I would argue that we were strongly had a strong advantage in terms of talent that was on the field. But again, the reason we got trounced in that game was almost exclusively about effort and intensity.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So going to our predictions, we had both predicted Penn State victories. You had said 54-21 Penn State. I said 63-17. And so the final score 56-44. I guess you win between us for being a little bit closer, but I guess neither of us were expecting it to be a close game. And I guess if you go by that, what was it? I say 56-24 score. That's more of what it was in the fourth quarter when the game was basically decided. So that's kind of what it was, and then we got the 3 touchdowns in garbage time, as it were.
Right, exactly.
So I guess that's relatively close to your 54-21.
Yeah, I would say
score. So I'll give you that one.
Oh well, thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. And then in terms of some stats, won't spend too long on these. We had 67 rushing yards, 26 attempts for 67 rushing yards. They had 35 for 263, and then we had
35. Let's break those down a little bit. So we had 67 yards on how many rushing attempts?
26.
26. So we rushed it 26 times, and so just a little over 2 yards a pop. And then theirs was
35 for 263.
For 263. Now do the math on that, baby, right? And I mean that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's somewhere in the range of 6 to 7.
6 to 7, right? Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So that's
all right, and then
domination.
Right, and then you look at the passing yards. We were 399. They had 346. We had 41 attempts for 26 completions. They had 39 attempts for 26 completions. So pretty much even in the passing game. Once again, this is something we've talked about many times in the past, the importance of the running game. Unfortunately, Diaco's defense has just completely shown its complete ineptitude in stopping the run game.
Yeah, I would say. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, especially in recent weeks.
Yeah.
It's like it's gotten worse, and it's because of tackling. And tackling is an intensity thing.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest criticisms, that I would have of Diaco's defensive approach has been, because scheme wise, I'm sure there's a bunch of 3-4 schemes out there that would do very well. But the way he's coached this team and the way that they have prepared, it's pretty clear that they don't practice tackling and they don't practice with intensity. Because if they did, they would behave very differently. They do not behave like a team that wants to play the game of football.
Well, this morning I was just listening to the college radio, football radio, and they mentioned that Alabama apparently runs a 3-4 scheme. Yep. So obviously it can work. You just have to have the right personnel and the right type of scheme that works within that overall.
Exactly, and aggressiveness, and again, coaching and teaching a level of intensity in terms of how you play the game, and you don't rely on the kids to say, well, we just have to get them to have their own want to. No, you demand the want to. And then once you demand it, they discover, hey, it's fun to play this way. And then they do it on their own as they mature. But you can't expect them to do it on their own, because I guarantee you, again, if you went and talked to them, the majority of those players, the vast majority of them, would all tell you they're giving as much effort as they possibly can. But you can look at them on film individually, and you can say, no, you're not. You're not. But you just don't realize it. And that's what a coach's job is. A coach's job is to take you where you didn't think you could go. That's what makes great coaches great, is they get you to do things at a level and an effectiveness that you never thought was achievable or imaginable on your own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the last stat I'll talk about, I thought this was a little interesting. It was, red zone scoring, times you got to the red zone versus times you scored in the red zone. Both teams were actually perfect in that regard. Just looking at the stat, we were 5 of 5, they were 7 of 7. But I guess that just goes to show how few times we made it to the red zone
Right.
before that kind of garbage time, as we refer to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, not too much more to comment on. It's just kind of repeating the same stuff we've been talking about the playmaking and the effort level. Unfortunately, at this point, it kind of seems like the team and probably some of the coaches as well, are thinking about, okay, what's my next job gonna be? That's got to be, not that they're vocalizing it, but in the back of their mind, that's got to be what they're thinking.
Well, yeah. Instead of trying to double down and do what they can to salvage this season, it seems like they've packed it in, and both players and coaches have made a decision that they're just going to kind of wait and see what happens at the end of the year, and then we'll start again next year. They've thrown in the towel on this year.
Yep. Yep. That's unfortunate, but
It
true.
is it is unfortunate.
Yep. So is there anything more you want to say about this game before we move on to the national topics?
No, not really. Other than I think it's just again a microcosm of everything that's gone wrong with our season, and is pretty predictive, if I will say, of AJ, who has been a guest on this show's prediction going back to the preseason. He sensed even then that this coaching staff was going to struggle, and that this is the kind of season we were going to have. And he has been just absolutely right on with it
Yep.
this
Yep.
year.
Yep. Well, I think our fans out there must be like, "Oh, get these losers out of here. Let's get AJ back on. He had it right.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got that football mind, I guess." All right. So now we're going to talk about the playoff ranking, because specifically we're going to talk about Week 12, the previous week, because the last podcast we did was before those rankings had come out, and we actually gave some predictions on there about the who the top four were going to be. And you had said Alabama, Clemson, Miami, Oklahoma as the top four, whereas I had swapped Miami and Clemson, Miami 2, Clemson 3. It turns out you were correct. That's the way it was last week. It was Alabama 1, Clemson 2, Miami 3, Oklahoma 4, Wisconsin 5, Auburn 6, Georgia 7, Notre Dame 8.
Right.
Right there, which I was a little bit surprised by, because I just thought that since Miami had such a dominant win over Notre Dame and that they were undefeated, that they deserved it over Clemson. But the committee didn't go that way that week. What was your reaction to that?
Well, I had expected that, and I think it has to do with, there's a little bit of not just what have you done lately, but the committee tends to look at things with a little bit longer eye, and Clemson has earned a little bit of respect given the fact that they're the defending national champions, and I think the committee also tends to look ahead and recognize that, okay, those two are on a collision course, Miami and Clemson, and they're going to play each other in this conference championship game, and so that's going to work itself out. Those two are going to figure it out between the two of them because they're going to play each other, and so I think there's a little bit of a willingness to say, okay, we're gonna maintain the status quo here and go with the team that has. At this point, the Miami program this year is a bit of an upstart compared to where Clemson is. Clemson's the established national power, and Miami's a team that has a great history, but has not been in that conversation for quite some time, and so they're the new flavor to the table.
Right. No, I hear you there. I'm actually looking up their schedule right now just because I'm curious. Because I've heard them once again talking on the radio and from hearing clips that the committee is taking into account with Clemson, because they had an awful loss to Syracuse, who's like a
Yes,
seven
they
loss
did.
team or something like that this year. But their quarterback was out, so the committee takes that into
Right.
effect. Which I
Right.
agree that they should do that, but at the same time, I feel like no other team in the top, five has a loss nearly that bad. So,
Right.
well, At least I think so. I'd have to look more closely, but I mean, I think
Well,
that's the worst. So
I think you're probably right about that, Alex. But again, what I'm thinking is they're looking at the overall body of the work, and they are cutting them a little slack on that one loss because of some special circumstances, whatever you want to call it. But again, and I also think it's because they're not overly concerned because they know those two teams are going to face each other. If there was not an imminent Miami versus Clemson matchup coming, say Miami was in a different conference, they were out in the Big 12 or something, then that would probably be a bigger issue, and it might very well be that by now Miami would have passed them.
mm-hmm.
Which now they just came out with the new rankings,
Right,
and the new rankings are still those four teams.
right, but Miami did pass them.
Exactly.
Right.
So there's a little bit of delay, but it came about.
Right. Yeah. No, and we'll talk about that after we talk about the Week 12 stuff. The big
Yeah.
game from that week was obviously Wisconsin and Michigan, and we also gave predictions on that. You had predicted a close victory for Michigan, whereas I predicted a close victory for Wisconsin. And in the end, Wisconsin ended up winning 24-10. But you were talking earlier about how that score does not show how close the game was.
Well, I had thought that there were two turnovers. There was actually just one, and both teams had one turnover. But there was an interception thrown by Hornibrook, the Wisconsin quarterback. But I don't recall that being necessarily an interception that took away an impending scoring opportunity for Wisconsin. But the turnover for Michigan was literally as they were driving in to score, like inside the 5-yard line. And so it was a huge turning point in the game for them. If you look at things like first downs, it was 13 first downs to 14 first downs for Wisconsin versus Michigan. So virtually identical there. Wisconsin ultimately did have quite a number of additional yards, and again, mostly came in the rushing game. Wisconsin's defense, which is one of the best in the country, held Michigan's rushing offense to 58 yards, while they ran for 182. And so, that's the difference in the game. And we just talked about rushing statistics and how that tends to be much more of a predictor of whether or not the team was successful in terms of putting points on the board. Here's another example of it, right? Just like in our game in Nebraska, where we actually threw for more yards than the other team, but they were irrelevant yards compared to what they were able to get done on the ground.
Exactly. Yep.
So,
Yep. Well, and to be fair, it goes both ways. Once again, just listening to the radio, they were bringing up that how good Wisconsin's defense is, how good their rushing game is, how good their offensive line is, and then the guy followed up with, "But they can't pass."
Right.
Which isn't entirely true, but compared to the other top teams, they're definitely lacking in that regard.
Right.
So it can go
And that will
the
probably
opposite way.
that will probably become the Achilles heel of Wisconsin if again, assuming that they win this weekend and beat Minnesota, they'll be 12-0, undefeated, and heading to the conference championship game to play most likely Ohio State.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And they're going to have to find a way to beat an Ohio State team, given their history, Wisconsin's pretty good in that conference championship game. So they very well may win that game and maybe win it, not comfortably, but I mean, they may win it in their traditional fashion, let's say, with dominant running game and because that Jonathan Taylor's the real deal. And then if they get to that point where they're 13-0, well, then they're going to get into that playoff. But once they get in that playoff, the teams they'll face in that playoff, they'll almost all likely be able to dispose of Wisconsin pretty comfortably.
Right. And I was going to save this for later, but let's talk about it now since it's on our minds. Okay. What, in terms of the committee, is their job to get like the most deserving teams to get into the top four, or is it to get like the best teams in college football, like no matter where they're from, the four best teams to get in there? Because I could see a scenario where Clemson and Miami play each other, and let's say that Clemson wins, so now
Beats,
both those
yeah,
teams have one loss. But you could
right,
make the argument that, well, if Miami and Wisconsin played each other head to head, Miami would beat them, and so they're the better
right.
team, and so they deserve to be in over an undefeated Wisconsin.
Okay, and so they're gonna. I'm gonna talk out of both sides of my mouth, or I'm going to reflect the talking out of both sides of the mouth that I believe the whole college football playoff structure says. They have built into their system a couple of things. They place a higher priority on being a conference champion. So winning your conference matters. It's a big deal, and it is given greater weight than just win loss record. Okay, and that was put in to the system to specifically make sure that in most years, if not all years, that the majority of the major Power Five conferences are going to be represented in that group of four, right? So that there would not be a circumstance where one conference might occupy two. I mean, because the argument could be made that there might be a year when an individual conference has three teams that you could objectively look at and say those three teams are all three of the four best teams in the country. Okay, but it's not likely that'll ever happen. In fact, it's going to be a rarity when two teams from the same conference get into the playoff. It'll happen, but it's going to happen very rarely because already you've got five power conferences and only four spots. So somebody is being left out every year, and if all of a sudden two of those five were left out, so that one conference could have two participants, trust me, that wouldn't go over real well. So I believe that the reality is that to make sure that the sport of college football does not become a regional sport and it remains a national interest and a national sport, they need to have all of those different conferences from the different regions of the country represented. And so there is a little bit of a compromise from what you said at the beginning there. Your objective of having the four best teams, regardless of where they're from, that's what they'll say. That's the goal is to get the four best teams. But they're going to get the four best teams within reason, given the five power conference structure that we have.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a more accurate way to put it.
Yep. No, I agree with that, and that's what was so interesting about Notre Dame when they were still in the conversation.
Right.
Them being in as an independent, which meant that there would only be three teams from the conferences, possibly even two. We talked about some crazy scenarios with that.
Right.
There are ways that the wrench can kind of be thrown in there. But I would certainly agree in the scenario where I laid out where Miami loses to Clemson, so they have one loss, and then Wisconsin beats Ohio State, and they're still undefeated. I would be personally very upset, even though I'm not a Wisconsin fan, if Wisconsin was left out if they were undefeated.
Oh, I would be furious. I mean that you have to put Wisconsin in there. If they've gone through a Big Ten conference schedule and a Big Ten conference championship game and remained undefeated throughout that whole process, and then you say no to them, that's going to bring on some problems, no doubt.
All right, and so that past weekend of college football, we kind of knew it was kind of a lesser weekend. There weren't as many big games, which we're going to talk about in a bit with what the SEC is doing there. But there were two upsets of interest that I saw. The most surprising to me was that Kansas State beat Oklahoma State 45-40. Definitely didn't see that one coming.
No, but every year, Bill Schneider is able to do that at least once or twice, where he plays a team and it basically causes them to play down to his team's level. He is able to maximize the talent that he has every year. Very consistently, he does that, and he tends to make it a slugfest. Every game he gets into, it ends up being a slugfest, and because over the years he's found that is basically a neutralizer You have a team in Oklahoma State that was high flying, one of the most explosive offenses in the country earlier in the year, and he gets them muddied into the ground, and all of a sudden, things don't go as easily for his for these other teams, and it gets kind of close, right? And then one turnover here or a mistake there, and bam, he's able to steal a victory.
Yep. And then the other upset of interest was Wake Forest beating NC State 30-24. I'm blanking on who. NC State played somebody of significance earlier in the year, and they beat them. The NC State got beaten by them, so that means their schedule is taken down a little bit. But I don't remember who it was.
Right. Yeah, I don't remember. I don't either. But and again, that's kind of what happens this time of year, right? That's where some of these upsets starts to happen, and there might be some explanations. If you dug a little deeper, you'd find out that some key players were missing from NC State, or with this stupid ejection rule, maybe a significant player got ejected, i.e. the Ohio State Iowa game, where Ohio State's heart and soul on their defense got ejected in that game early, and it totally changed the dynamic of Ohio State's team.
Right. They actually played Notre Dame, and then they played Clemson the week after.
Yeah,
so they had two big games back to back.
Right. And so they were probably beat up and emotionally drained and everything. And they were actually beating Clemson, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that game was close. You're correct. Mm-hmm. The Notre Dame game was not so close. And so our last topic would be to predict the score of the upcoming Iowa game. It is going to be at home, and Iowa, I believe they lost to Purdue. Is that right?
No, absolutely not.
No?
Well, they lost to. Who did they play this? Yeah, they lost last week, but it wasn't Purdue.
Yeah, but they lost to somebody of lesser talent. Is what I'm getting to.
I guess it could have been. Dang it. You're freaking me out now.
I'm looking it up right now. But
okay, good. You can probably find it faster than me.
Yes. See, I was right. It was 24. Purdue 24, Iowa 15.
Wow, that just blows me away. That is just not possible.
After they beat
blows me away.
Ohio State by like 30 points.
Yeah, it's just inexplicable. That's right. But yeah, that's Iowa for you.
And it's a Friday game. I didn't actually know that until I looked this up. That's interesting. Our game.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah. It's always the Black Friday game. It's been that way every year, buddy.
Okay. I just forget every year.
So, yeah.
Personally, I'm going to predict that Iowa wins, but I'm going to hope that being a home game and being senior day, and that Iowa has shown some vulnerability, that we play well and go out on a respectful note at least. We don't get blown out. So I'm going to predict that Iowa wins, but let's say it'll be 32-27. I'll go with that.
32-27. I agree with your contention, but just to be contrarian and to be opposite of you, I am going to suggest that Nebraska is going to win this game, that we are going to rise, that our seniors are going to play with an intensity that we haven't seen in quite some time, frankly, and they're not necessarily playing for coach's job, because I don't think there's anything that they could do that would change that. Meaning, even if they win, I don't think Riley keeps his job. I think he's gone either way. But I believe the players will play for each other in a way they haven't in the past, and I'm hopeful that the crowd and everything will be into things, and cheer the guys to victory. So I'm going to take the same score as you, but Nebraska wins.
There we go. Okay.
How about that?
All right. I like the sounds of that. Let's hope it plays out that way.
Yes.
All right. Good stuff. Yep. And it's crazy because unfortunately.
Hey, let me ask you a quick question then.
Okay.
So you talked about how important the Alabama-Auburn game. Who you picking there?
Yeah, I thought we might talk about the big games. I'm definitely picking Bama.
Yeah.
I don't think they're. Although, let me look up real quick, unless you know where it's being played.
I don't. Nope, I do not.
That might be
I'm thinking
interesting.
it's at Auburn.
I think you're right. But I'm going to take Bama and I'm going to take Ohio State in the Michigan game as well.
Me too.
It is at Auburn. You're correct.
It is at Auburn, but I think Alabama wins and comfortably. And I think Ohio State, Michigan is closer than people think, but Ohio State wins.
All right. Well, just to make things interesting, I'm going to say that the Bama Auburn game is close, and that the
Okay.
Ohio State game is more of a blowout. To
Okay.
go opposite of
There
you.
we go. I like it.
There we go. All right. But yeah, I guess it's interesting that next week's going to be our last podcast of this football season, since the Huskers won't be going bowling.
Yep.
So
Well, it'll be the last one for our seasonal weekly ones, but we're going to obviously have some as some of the announcements come out that we're anticipating. We'll have to have a conference or two about the new staff and etc.
Oh yeah.
When those probable events occur.
Yep, and we'll talk about the conference championship games and who gets
Right.
picked for the playoff and all that fun stuff.
Right.
So we'll still have podcasts, yeah, but yeah, they may not be weekly after the season ends.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Sounds great.
All right. Well, if you out there enjoyed listening to us, you can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can find us online at footballthrowdown.podomatic.com. You can listen to the podcast there, leave a comment, or you can find us on iTunes at College Football Throwdown. Leave a rating or review. Let us know what you think of the podcast, how we can improve. And I want to thank you all out there for listening, and you, Dad, for co-hosting with me. And until next week, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.